Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. Look, if you're out there building a business, scaling up a side hustle, or, just managing a team, you're definitely going to want to lock in your focus right now. Because today, we're basically acting as your ultimate cheat code. We are going to bypass those agonizing, grueling business lessons that usually take folks years of literal sweat and tears to figure out. What we've done is distill the absolute essentials, giving you all that hard-won wisdom, but completely skipping the hard-won scars.
So I want you to just think about this question for a second. Why do the simplest business lessons usually cost the absolute most to learn? It's kind of a harsh reality of the entrepreneurial world, right? Business tuition isn't typically paid to some fancy university. No, it's usually paid directly to the market in the totally unforgiving currency of painful, wildly expensive mistakes. We hear this basic advice all the time, and what do? We brush it off. We think it's way too simple, or we assume, hey, my situation is completely unique. Well, that is, until the trap suddenly snaps shut. Today, we're going in and disarming those traps before you ever even step foot near them.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for today. We've got 4 hard truths to uncover. First up, the cost of experience. Then, cash flow versus profit. Number 3, how revenue hides problems. 4, why you absolutely must filter customers. And finally, number 5, how pricing is a message. Let's get to it.
All right, starting off with part 1, which is really the overarching theme for this entire explainer, the cost of experience.
So the core idea here is that simple business lessons often only become valuable to us after we've made some really costly mistakes. This right here is the ultimate clash between hard truths and naive expectations. Because look, when things are humming along and going well, it's so incredibly easy to be naive. You kind of start thinking you can outsmart the basic fundamentals of business. But the reality? The most profound realizations in business almost never come from some super complex algorithm. They come from suddenly realizing you completely ignored a fundamental rule, right up until it broke your bank account. So our goal today is to completely shift that paradigm for you. You really don't have to make the mistake yourself to extract all the value from the lesson.
And honestly, that brings us perfectly into our very first specific and maybe the most absolutely critical lesson. Section 2, cash flow beats profit.
I really want you to notice the stark contrast we've got going on here. On one side, we have profit. Now, don't get me wrong, profit is fantastic. We all love profit. But here's the catch. Profit happens on paper. It's basically a report card you get at the end of the quarter. On the other side, though, we have cash flow. Cash flow is the actual, tangible money currently sitting in your bank account. Profit is just an accounting metric. Cash flow is oxygen. You could have a hugely profitable quarter on your spreadsheet, sure, but if your clients haven't actually paid their invoices yet and suddenly payroll is due this Friday, your business is literally suffocating.
So let's really cement this definition. Cash flow is the actual physical movement of money coming in and going out of your business. It's the absolute boots-on-the-ground reality of your day-to-day survival. Imagine this. You just signed a massive contract, say for $100,000. Your profit margins, they look incredible. You're popping champagne, celebrating. But the terms of that contract dictate that you don't actually see a dime for 90 days. And worse, you have to buy all the materials to start the job tomorrow. All of a sudden, you're drinking champagne, but you can literally only afford to eat instant ramen. That right there, that's the trap. The naive expectation is that if a business is profitable, it simply can't fail. The hard truth? A highly profitable business can absolutely bankrupt itself if the cash isn't actually flowing into the accounts when those bills are due. Always prioritize the flow of cash first. Okay, let's move along and see exactly how this builds into our next major trap. Section 3, revenue hides serious problems. We like to call this trap the growth illusion. Basically, massive top-line revenue growth can act as a giant mask for internal operational rot. It is just so incredibly easy to fall into the mindset that all revenue is good revenue. I mean, when you're staring at your dashboard and those sales numbers are just climbing and climbing month over month, it gives you this really powerful, almost intoxicating false sense of security. You're thinking, obviously we're growing, everything's got to be fine. But those massive sales numbers can completely blind you to the fact that maybe your costs are skyrocketing just as fast, or that your internal systems are literally falling apart at the seams under the pressure of all that new volume.
Now, what's really fascinating about this is how clearly the data exposes that exact illusion. Check out that massive bar on the left representing top-line revenue. Looks pretty impressive, right? If that was the only thing you were looking at, you'd probably think you were running a total empire. But then, look right next to it. Look at that incredibly tiny profit margin and the virtually non-existent cash flow bar.
This, my friends, is exactly what operational rot looks like visually. You are doing a tremendous amount of work. You're moving a huge amount of money around, but you are keeping almost none of it. And honestly, revenue without margin is just busy work. If your revenue is doubling, but your bank account is staying exactly the same, your so-called growth is actually hiding a really serious, fundamental flaw in your business model.
Transitioning into our third core lesson, we're going to challenge one of the absolute oldest dogmas in the book. Section 4, fire your bad customers. The absolute crucial point to grasp here is this: not every customer deserves to stay. I know, right? For decades, we have all been beaten over the head with this idea that the customer is always right. We're taught that you have to bend over backward to keep every single piece of business that happens to walk through your door. But actual, real-world experience completely shatters that naive expectation. Clinging to the wrong customers is a massively costly mistake. Sometimes, the absolute best thing you can possibly do for both the health of your business and, quite frankly, the sanity of your entire team is to practice addition by subtraction. Let's look at these warning signs, and as we go through them, I really want you to take a second and mentally audit your own customer roster. Do you have a client right now who constantly drains your resources? Are they demanding outsized attention for the absolute smallest invoices? Do they completely wreck your team's morale by being abusive or by constantly shifting the goalposts on a project? Are they eating up your precious time without actually providing any clear return on investment? Bad customers basically force you into costly operational mistakes because you're just constantly running around trying to put out their unique, unnecessary fires. Listen, if a customer is checking these boxes, they aren't contributing to your business at all. They are actively sabotaging it. Fire them, seriously. Let them go and free up that capacity for clients who actually respect the value you bring to the table.
And hey, speaking of value, that leads us directly to our final lesson for today. Section 5, pricing is a message.
I want you to just look at these two numbers side by side. $99 versus $10,000. Now, without knowing a single thing about the product, without seeing a feature list, without reading a single customer review, what do these two completely different price tags instantly communicate to your brain? The $99 item instantly feels accessible. It feels a bit commoditized, maybe even easily replaceable. But that $10,000 item? That instantly demands respect. It implies a premium quality, exclusivity, and high stakes. The crazy part is, the number itself is doing all that heavy lifting before a single word of marketing copy is even spoken. Which brings us to this essential definition right here. Pricing is not just some simple math equation. It really isn't just taking your base costs and blindly slapping 20% on top. Pricing is an incredibly powerful communication tool. It's the psychology of value. It is literally the very first story you are telling your market about what you are actually worth. Think about it. If you underprice yourself, you aren't just making less money. You're actively sending a signal to the market that your product might actually be inferior. And guess what? You might end up attracting those exact same bad customers we were just talking about firing. But when you raise your prices, you completely change that message. You signal true authority, you filter out the bargain hunters, and you attract clients who are genuinely invested in high-quality outcomes. All right, let's pull all of this together into what we're going to call the preventative cheat code. These are the 4 critical mindset shifts you need to bypass those super painful lessons we discussed. Number 1, prioritize cash. Remember, profit is paper, cash flow is oxygen. Number 2, audit your revenue. Do not let massive top-line numbers hide your operational rot. Number 3, filter your customers. Protect your team and your precious resources by aggressively removing the dead weight. And finally, number 4, signal value. Use your pricing as a megaphone to tell the market exactly what you're worth. The absolute biggest roadblock is usually sitting right between your own ears. You see, you literally cannot scale a machine if you're fundamentally terrified of breaking it. So we're jumping straight back into the framework with a concept that fundamentally separates stagnant companies from the absolute industry giants. We're picking up the momentum immediately with Lesson 5, Speed Beats Perfection, always.
Look, I know it sounds a bit like a cliche, but the psychology behind this is actually profound. We love to tell ourselves that perfectionism is a virtue, right? That holding a product back until every single pixel is flawlessly aligned means we just have incredibly high standards. But the hard truth in business operations, perfectionism is almost always a subconscious shield. It's a defense mechanism. Notice the stark contrast here. On one side, we have strategic speed, which is all about imperfect action. It's about getting a messy, functional product out into the real world quickly because, let's be real, real-world feedback is infinitely more valuable than boardroom theory. On the flip side, perfectionism just leads straight to paralysis. You delay launches, you burn through your runway, and you basically operate on assumed failure. Getting an imperfect offer into the market and letting your actual paying customers tell you what's wrong with it, that's going to outperform a theoretical perfect launch 100% of the time. But hey, speed doesn't just mean frantic, chaotic movement. And that brings us directly to lesson 6. Being busy isn't building a business.
So, I want you to answer this honestly. Are you actually moving the needle, or are you just shuffling papers around? When you first start out, doing everything yourself is literally a necessity. You have to. But as you scale, this exact mindset turns into absolute poison. We start confusing motion with progress. Just because you're totally exhausted at the end of a 14-hour workday does not mean you actually moved your company forward. You know, human psychology is completely wired to seek the path of least resistance. We crave that immediate, tiny dopamine hit of crossing a simple task off a to-do list. So naturally, we gravitate toward the easy, repetitive admin stuff. Clearing out the inbox, tweaking a logo font, organizing desktop files, because it feels incredibly productive. But subconsciously, we're actually doing this to actively avoid the hard, deeply uncomfortable revenue-generating activities. The cold calling, pitching investors, having that tough conversation to restructure a failing department. Fake busyness is literally where businesses go to slowly die.
Escaping that trap of fake busyness requires a total, foundational shift in your operational infrastructure. Lesson 7. Systems create freedom. I know, it feels super counterintuitive at first. People hear the word systems and immediately think of rigid corporate bureaucracy, endless red tape, and kissing their creativity goodbye. But the exact opposite is true. If you are constantly putting out the exact same fires every single Tuesday, you don't have a dynamic business, you just have a highly stressful, underpaying job. Building a reliable machine is genuinely the only way to buy back your mental bandwidth. Here is a concrete blueprint for taking a messy, painful headache and turning it into a completely streamlined system. Step 1, audit the chaotic task. Figure out exactly what is draining your time. Step 2, document the exact workflow. Write down every single click and decision like you're explaining it to a 5-year-old. Step 3, automate it with software or delegate it to a trained team member using that documentation you just wrote. And Step 4, reclaim your founder time so you can focus on high-leverage growth. You just run this cycle over and over until the business can literally operate without you physically being there. But, of course, here is the catch. The hardest part of systematizing isn't figuring out the latest software tool or writing the standard operating procedures. The hardest part is overcoming what we call the founder bottleneck. That's when a business's growth is artificially capped by your own psychological need to control every single micro decision. It is completely ego-driven. You convince yourself that nobody out there can do the task as well as you can, and honestly, at first they probably won't. But hear me out. A team executing a system at 80% efficiency while you're fast asleep is infinitely more scalable than you executing at 100% until you completely burn out and collapse.
That reality check on our egos transitions perfectly into Lesson 8. Your business will never outgrow your decisions.
The absolute structural ceiling of any scaling company is set entirely by the quality of the leader's strategic choices. Think about it. If you're making panicked, reactive decisions based entirely on the stress of whatever is happening today, your operational structure is going to reflect that exact chaos. You are the architect here. The systems, the team, the culture, they can only rise to the exact level of the standards you set and enforce through your everyday choices. So the crucial piece is how you filter those choices. I'm going to give you 4 rapid-fire principles. First, avoid daily decision fatigue. Save your heavy brain power for the really big swings. Second, choose hard scalability over easy comfort. Taking the easy shortcut today almost always means massive operational debt tomorrow. Third, cut underperforming processes immediately. Don't let nostalgia keep a broken system on life support. And finally, anchor every single choice to your long-term goals. If a decision doesn't directly serve your 5-year vision, it is just a distraction.
Okay, now we're pivoting our focus outward. With Lesson 9, marketing is your business's oxygen.
Look, you can build the most beautiful, meticulously systematized, perfectly efficient back-office operation in the whole world. You can literally have the single best product on the market. But if nobody knows you exist, you just die in obscurity. Far too many founders get completely obsessed with internal operations and entirely neglect their market presence. Look at how resources are typically allocated for a company in aggressive scaling mode. 45% of time, capital, and energy are aggressively pumped directly into marketing and sales. 40% goes into product and operations just to make sure you can actually fulfill that new demand. And admin and overhead? That gets squeezed way down to a lean 15%.
This breakdown shows you that a growing business absolutely must actively and relentlessly invest in capturing market share. You are effectively buying attention, and attention is the ultimate currency of scale.
But just throwing a ton of capital at marketing brings us to a really critical warning in Lesson 10. Trust is your greatest asset. Because all the aggressive ad spend in the world is completely useless if the market doesn't fundamentally believe in you. Marketing is what gets them to look at you, sure, but trust is what actually gets them to open their wallets. There's a great saying, trust is earned in drops and lost in buckets. The psychology of consumer loyalty is incredibly fragile. You earn that trust drop by drop through hundreds of tiny, everyday operational promises that you keep. Delivering a day early, answering support tickets in minutes instead of days, providing a product that actually does what you promised it would do. That is your ultimate business mode. But the absolute second you slip up, or you lie, or you let those operational standards drop, you lose that hard-earned trust in absolute buckets. Rebuilding a shattered reputation is literally the most expensive operational cost a business will ever face.
So how do you maintain that level of trust at scale? Well, that brings us to our final theme of execution, starting with Lesson 11, hiring the right people.
All these systems and marketing campaigns we've been talking about, they are just theoretical frameworks until actual human beings step in to run them. The harsh reality of scaling is that you absolutely cannot do it alone. And who you decide to bring into the bunker with you will either act as a massive rocket booster for your operations or a heavy iron anchor dragging you straight to the bottom. Consider the cost of a bad hire. When you hire out of pure desperation just because you need a warm body and a seat, you end up with drained team morale, weeks of completely lost training time, and serious customer friction. It literally infects your entire culture. Now contrast that with the incredible ROI of a great hire. When you hire for actual strategic and cultural fit, you get a multiplier effect. They bring autonomous growth to the table. They actually elevate the standards of every single person around them. One truly great operator can replace 3 mediocre ones and fundamentally change the entire trajectory of your business.
But how do you actually know if your team, your systems, and your marketing are working? Lesson 12, numbers never lie.
We've talked a whole lot about psychology, ego, and emotion throughout this explainer. But as an operational leader, there comes a defining moment where your human emotions and your gut assumptions absolutely must bow down to empirical data. Your gut instinct might have gotten you off the ground, but data is the only thing that will take you to the stratosphere. Stripping away a founder's feelings looks exactly like a clean financial dashboard. You might feel like your marketing is going great, but a simple operational health check tells you the unvarnished truth. Let's say your customer acquisition cost has a target of $50 and your actual is $45. Well, that's highly efficient. Status is healthy. Profit margin target is 20%, actual is 22%. Fantastic, right? But then your eyes scan down and you hit a metric like your churn rate. The target is to stay under 5%, but the actual is sitting at a glaring warning level.
8.2%. When you isolate a single metric like this, it practically screams at you. Data doesn't just report on history, it explicitly tells you exactly where your operations are actively bleeding right now, today. An 8.2% churn rate means all that expensive marketing oxygen we talked about earlier, it's just filling up a bucket with a massive gaping hole in the bottom. Your customers are walking out the back door. It forces you to stop admiring your healthy profit margin and immediately pivot your entire team's focus over to customer retention and product quality. You simply cannot argue with the math.
So, I want to leave you with this. If the numbers are telling the complete, unfiltered truth, what is your data begging you to change before tomorrow? Take a really close look at your own metrics. The friction points you're conveniently ignoring today are going to become the exact reasons your scaling efforts collapse next quarter. The data is talking. The only question is whether you are brave enough to listen and then execute the pivot required.
All right, so mastering advanced business growth, it's really not about some secret formula. Today, we're jumping right back into our explainer, looking at the absolute core mechanics of scaling. We're breaking down the exact frameworks that separate those flash-in-the-pan startups from, the actual enduring empires. Let's dive straight into Lesson 13.
Stop competing on price alone. Seriously, I want you to mentally draw a big, bold line right down the middle of your strategy. On one side, you've got the race to the bottom, slashing prices, trimming your margins to the bone, just fighting tooth and nail for the cheapest customer. And let me tell you, that is a race you absolutely do not want to win. Now, on the other side of that line is competing on value. This means shifting your entire focus toward creating unmatched premium solutions.
When you compete on value, you're solving problems so effectively and delivering such an incredible experience that price basically becomes an afterthought to your buyer. You don't want to be the cheapest, right? You want to be the absolute best. Which brings us to lesson 14, and this one is huge. In the business world, your reputation is the ultimate currency. Seriously, it's vastly more valuable than whatever cash you happen to be sitting on in the bank. But here's the brutal reality. It takes 20 grueling years of relentless, consistent work to build a bulletproof reputation. We're talking 2 whole decades of delivering on your promises, treating your partners fairly, and holding on to your integrity when absolutely nobody is watching. 20 years to build that unshakable trust in the market.
But, man, here's how instantly the whole shebang can unravel. 5 seconds. Yep, it takes exactly 5 seconds of poor judgment to completely nuke that 20-year reputation. It's crazy, right? But it really illustrates just how incredibly fragile the human element of business is. One careless off-the-cuff email, one shady shortcut just to hit a quarterly target, or one very public meltdown and poof, 2 decades of goodwill gone. Trust is built in drops and lost in buckets. You have to ruthlessly protect your reputation every single day because you can lose it forever in the time it takes to send a text.
Moving on to lesson 15. Now, what's really interesting here is how clarity creates better decisions. As you scale up, you are going to be bombarded. New opportunities, random fires to put out, a million new ideas. It can feel like total chaos. But plotting your choices on a simple matrix of impact versus effort, that completely eliminates the mental fog. It's like a giant filter for your brain. If a project is high effort but low impact, you just drop it immediately, no questions asked. But if it's high impact and low effort, boom, that becomes your immediate priority. Visualizing your decisions like this strips away all that daily noise, guaranteeing you're only deploying resources where they'll actually move the needle.
And that ties perfectly into lesson 16, focus beats more ideas. When you dedicate a massive 85% of your energy to one singular primary goal, incredible things happen. I know, it is so tempting to chase every shiny new idea or adjacent market that pops up, but splitting your focus, it just fractures your momentum. A dozen mediocre, half-baked ideas will always lose out to one single idea that you execute brilliantly. So you've got to starve your distractions to feed your primary focus. That is how you guarantee your absolute best effort goes toward the one goal that actually matters. All right, lesson 17. We need to talk about the internal battle going on in your head. Reactive emotion versus proactive logic. Bottom line, never let emotions run your business. Picture this for a second. A founder finds out a vital, long-term vendor is going to miss a critical shipment by 3 days. Operating entirely on reactive emotion, the founder completely loses it, fires off this blistering, insulting email, and permanently blows up a relationship that literally took 5 years to cultivate. And guess what? The shipment was still delayed, but now the whole supply chain is completely severed. Proactive logic says you take a breath, look at the data, and solve the problem structurally. Remember, emotion creates chaos, logic creates actual solutions.
Which leads us right into lesson 18. Strong relationships build strong businesses. Every successful partnership rests on 3 non-negotiable pillars. First up, mutual benefit. Every deal has to be a win-win, or it simply won't survive, period. Second is clear communication. Ambiguity is the absolute enemy of a good partnership. And third, bulletproof trust. Building a rock-solid network of trusted vendors, partners, and employees isn't just, a nice-to-have perk. It is your ultimate safety net. Because when things inevitably go sideways, and trust me, they always do, it's this exact network built on these 3 pillars that's going to catch you and help you navigate the storm.
So once those relationships are locked in, you enter the sustainable scaling phase. And lesson 19 is incredibly simple. Build before you need it. You really can't afford to wait for your company to break before you start fixing it. First, you have to anticipate the bottleneck. You got to ask yourself, where are my systems going to fracture when our sales double? Next, you build the operational infrastructure right now, like in advance. Only then can you move on to scaling safely. If you try to force hypergrowth through some fragile, outdated system, the whole company will just collapse under its own weight. Put the pipes in place before you turn on the water.
And this brilliantly illustrates the math of success for lesson 20. Consistency always wins. Erratic effort, like that founder who grinds for 100 hours one week, totally burns out, and then does absolutely nothing for 3 weeks. That never compounds. But small, daily, unrelenting increments, those create a massive exponential growth curve over time. Showing up every single day, improving by just 1%, it generates results that honestly look like pure magic to the outside world. Consistency is always going to beat those sporadic, exhausting bursts of hustle.
But here's the catch. All of this scaling hinges completely on Lesson 21, avoiding the personal bottleneck. A personal bottleneck happens when a business literally outgrows its founder's current level of skill, mindset, or emotional maturity. It is a harsh truth to swallow, but if you're out there trying to manage a 50-person company with the exact same mindset you used when it was just you and a laptop, you have become the ceiling. Your business only grows when you grow. As a founder, you have to constantly, intentionally upgrade your own personal operating system. Read, adapt, evolve, do whatever it takes to prevent becoming the very thing holding your own company back.
All right, let's pull all of this together. Throughout this explainer, we've broken down the entire anatomy of advanced growth into 3 distinct pillars. First up, strategy. So, competing on unmatched value and plotting out clear, logical decisions. Second, people. Navigating the super fragile, vital human elements of protecting your reputation and mastering your own emotional responses to build unbreakable trust. And third, sustainable scale. Focusing your energy, building systems well before they break, and ensuring you are personally evolving right alongside your company.
So grab your mental notebook, because here is your rapid-fire recap for the days ahead. Ready? Stop racing to the bottom and sell unmatched value instead. Guard your reputation with your life. Starve those distractions so you can focus your absolute best energy on one brilliant execution. Rely on proactive logic, never reactive emotion. Build your infrastructure early, way before the pressure hits. Lean into the compounding math of daily consistency, and above all else, seriously, if you take nothing else away, never ever stop upgrading your own mindset.
Because here is the absolute truth. Every single framework we've covered today is entirely within your control. But information without execution? Well, that's just entertainment. These insights we've mapped out are only valuable if they actually make it into your daily operations. So don't wait for next quarter. Don't even wait for Monday. Which lesson are you going to execute today to permanently change the trajectory of your business?